There we go.
Doctrine is just another word for teaching. So when you use the word doctrine, that's what you're saying. You're saying teaching. Hebrews 6 from the top. Therefore, laying what? Therefore, leaving the principles of the doctrine of Christ, let us go on unto perfection, not laying again the foundation of repentance for dead work and the faith toward the Most High, too, of the doctrine of baptism and of laying on of hands and of the resurrection of the dead and of eternal judgment. Resurrection of the dead, judgment, laying on the hands, that's the doctrine, the doctrine, the resurrection of the dead, judgment, laying on the hands, that's the doctrine, how can you deny it? His teaching is legal like a fountain. Wouldn't even be alive if Jesus tell me he into the mountain. When it got kicked down and stepped in, he gave these brothers with back to earth. When he talked the streets with pastors, armies, and fled into Africa. Now he be wandered there, going up and down, he never existed. In the heavenly realm, at the right hand of the Father, where he sit and it's waiting on that word, waiting on that word. As soon as the Bible gives on that word, he can go into that third. And really complete the stroke. Then follow instruction. Go back and get my elected multitude in the word redemption. But you talking about the baptism is the washing of the water of the word. But the scriptures make a difference. John had the greatest work. Why was black people looking in the lake and say he had the greatest work? Well, his name is John the Baptist. People bringing and submerged until you follow Christ. Right? When Christ got submerged in the serving is not greater than the master. Did he serve? I get that back.
Shema Yasharala Ahaya, Ahaya Nawa Ahaya Akkad, Hero Israel.
The Lord our power is one power. Shema Yasharala Ahaya, Ahaya Nawa Ahaya Akkad, Hero Israel. The Lord our power is one power. Shema Yasharala Ahaya, Ahaya Nawa Ahaya Akkad, Hero Israel. The Lord our power is one power.
All right, so we all give glory and praise to Ahaya Ashar Ahaya, Ashai and the Holy Spirit. Peace to all the 12 tribes that are scattered throughout the four corners of the earth. And shalom to those that are not of the blood lineage of Israel, but because they keep the law, statutes, and commandments, they have the surname of Israel. Tonight, on our Thursday night lesson, we're going to discuss Philippians. And when it comes to Philippians, for those of you who are on the chat and those of you who are here, what do you think?
Everybody don't speak at once, man. See what had happened with it.
So what we're going to do before we get into the Bible study, we're going to discuss it. Well, you all are going to discuss it. I'm just going to sit back and nod or roll my eyes, depending
Don't roll
on.
your eyes, you make your pink eye.
Yeah.
Do that.
Book of Philippians. You had a week to read 4 chapters.
This is Pat.
Oh, you know what? Okay. So, with Philippians,
Her accent.
what stood out to me
You gotta
was
speak louder so they can hear you on YouTube.
what what stood out to me was first thing in chapter 4, in the first 3 verses, and that was, well, I guess I have to read it.
Uh-huh.
Philippians Chapter 4, verses 1 through 3. Therefore, my brethren, dearly beloved, and long for my joy and peace. So stand fast in the Lord, my dearly beloved. I beseech Euodias and beseech Syntyche, that they be of the same mind in the Lord. And I entreat thee also, true yoke fellow, those women which labored with me in the gospel, with Clement also, and with other my fellow laborers, whose names are in the book of life. So that stood out to me because, yeah, how do you say it? Yodius and Sin, they were actually feuding.
Eodius and Cynthia. Yeah.
So they were actually feuding
Mm-hmm.
between those two women.
Mm-hmm.
And they actually came together in Yeshaya.
Mm-hmm.
They got over that field of their churches and they actually came together and worked for Yeshua together. It says that they be in the same mind in the Lord.
Okay.
And that's the one thing that in a lot of with ministry, the women tend to be divided, whether it's jealousy or envy or backbiting. So that's one of the major things that that shows in Philippians. Also, throughout the book of Philippians, it talks about joy and happiness in serving Yeshua and being like Yeshua. And I was just thinking about that, how good it how good it feels to have Yeshua's approval. Because we know man's approval doesn't matter. So to have Yeshua's approval and for Yeshua to say that you're doing right and you're righteous is better than anything you could think of.
Okay.
Karen says, I think it was the church Paul might have loved the most.
Nope. But that's okay.
Eliana said, for me, chapter 2 and 3 really spoke to me. From chapter 2, I took from when Paul was describing the different motives people serve, and a reminder of what not to do, and to serve out of love for Yeshua. To remember the reason you're serving and not get caught up in why others do. And chapter 3, a reminder that when you're out to the reason you're serving, you're outed to the reason you're serving. It isn't out of love, it's to correct your and nothing more, because if you continue to serve more alternative reasons, that will be your downfall.
Mm-hmm.
Karen says, I really like chapter 4, so much good advice. Philippians 4 and 6, be anxious for nothing, is one of my go-to verses. Also, I like how in chapter 3, there was a focus on the things of this world being of no gain.
Mm-hmm.
Eliana says, needless to say, it was a super testy week after reading as I did and what I got from it. Karen says,
Mm-hmm.
and Paul says, he forgot what was behind and set for what's in front, which is something I had to remind myself not to look back but to go forward.
Yeah, a lot of us do.
And in chapter 2, I like verse 2 and verse 5 talking about having the mind of Yeshua. It made me think of how precious his thoughts should be to us.
Or how your thoughts should be. Yes?
A verse that really stood out to me is Philippians 4 and 6 as well, which says, be careful for nothing, but in everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known unto the Most High. And as I was meditating on that verse, I thought about Matthew 13, where Shai said that he that received thorn, in Matthew 13 and 22, he also that received seed among the thorns is he that hears the word, and the care of this world and the deceitfulness of riches choke the word, and he becomes uprooted. So that word care also Philippians 4:6 means anxious, be anxious for nothing. And then the person that's anxious in in Matthew 13 is somebody who's anxious of the things of this world, and that starts to become a distraction to him. Distracting him from Yeshua, and now that person becomes a fool. So that's something that really stuck out to me.
I have how the Gospels are defense and how Philippians talks about how our mind should be.
Okay, let's understand something. Philippians is not the Gospels. It's not part of the Gospels. It's part of the epistles. Gospels are Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John.
Says,
Yeah, the book is not a gospel, it's an epistle.
I meant by that. That's not what I meant. I meant how in the scriptures, Paul actually states that the gospel is our defense.
Oh, okay.
Talks about how our mind should be because he states over and over again, let this mind be in you. Talks a lot about humbleness and love. We are the light of the world. He tells us to rejoice. I thought that the Philippians didn't seem like they were in trouble. It seemed like he was giving them kind of like a refresher on how they should be, but it did seem like he was like scorning them. He tells them to beware of a lot of things, and one thing that stood out is that he said, forget the past and look forward. And then he talks a lot about togetherness.
Right. So, a lot of good points with Philippians. Now, yeah, a lot of good points with Philippians. However, no, I'm just kidding. All right. So when it comes to Philippians, it wasn't that they were doing everything right, because they were doing some things that are wrong also that Paul had to, talk to them about. But he didn't have to do it like he did with Corinth and with Galatia. He didn't have to do it as strenuous as he was with Corinth and Galatia, or excuse me, Galatians. Right? When it comes to Philippians, first let's talk about the city. Philippians, they were a Greek city. And Philippians was named after Philippi, or Philip, sorry. It was really the city is Philippi. That's the name of the city. And it was named after Philip, who was Alexander the Greek's or Greek father. So it's named after him. Paul, of course, wrote the letter. And Paul wrote the letter in prison. What are the three? What are the other three prison epistles? Mm, right. Now, Paul, the Philippian letter was wrote about 60 AD when Paul was under house arrest with the Praetorian Guard. If we go to Philippians 1 and 13, it says, "So that my bonds in Yeshua are manifest in all the palace and in all other places." So we get an understanding that Paul was under Praetorian Guard. Praetorian Guard are the ones who protect the Caesar or the emperor. Also in Philippians 4 and 22, it says, "All the saints salute you, chiefly that are of Caesar's household." And so that tells us that Paul was under arrest in Rome, where Caesar lived. 4:22. Now we're going to go through the book of Philippians, and we're going to talk about each chapter. Also with Philippi, after Octavian, when Octavian defeated Mark Antony and his army about 31 BC, that probably is well known because Mark Antony and Cleopatra were highly romanticized, and Mark Antony thought that he would kill himself, not get captured, if Cleopatra did the same. And if you know the story, it didn't happen that way. Philippi was a strategic colony, a military city. And when you lived in Philippi, you had special privileges. The citizens of Philippi thought of themselves as being Romans. The official language in Philippi was Latin, but there was also Greek. And that's in Acts 16:12. Okay. So it was a very important city because of the main roads between Asia and Europe. Those roads went through Philippi. You're going to find a lot of differences with this church than the one in Corinth. In fact, when it comes to Philippi, the first meetings were held at Lydia's home, and Lydia's home was in Philippi. She and her family were converts to the Israelites, and Paul instructed there. There was no synagogue in Philippi. So this church actually started out of her home. So Lydia did a lot of work in Philippi. The first man that brought to the church was the Philippian jailer, if you remember that. Okay. So when it comes to Philippians, Paul meets the church with a lot of love and admiration. Now, after we go through this Bible study of Philippians, you're probably going to ask yourself, well, how is this church not the best acting church? There was one church that really did the work, and we'll get to them, I don't know when, in some weeks. Philippians 1, verses 3 through 5. So we're going to talk about each individual chapter itself, because there's only 4. Instead of doing like a broad overview, which we're going to have to do when we get to Hebrews and a few other books. Philippians 1, 3 through 5 says, "I thank my God, upon every remembrance of you. That's love. Always in every prayer of mine for you all, making requests with joy. So Paul was not like with Corinth. He was the opposite with this church. Verse 5 says, "For your fellowship in the gospel from the first day until now." He explains how his imprisonment has done a great deal of advance for the Bible. I'm sorry, not for the Bible, for the gospel. Philippians Chapter 1, we're reading verses 12 through 18. Like I said, everyone had a very good idea of the book of Philippians. There was a lot of love going on. And there was one thing with Philippians that Paul did that he did not do with any of the other churches. And we'll see that in a moment. Philippians 1, 12 through 18 says, "But I would ye should understand, brethren, that the things which happened unto me have fallen out rather unto the furtherance of the gospel. So that my bonds in Yeshua are manifest in all the palace and in all other places. And many of the brethren in the Lord wax confident with my bonds, are much more bold to speak the word without fear." So they didn't see Paul as being locked up and saying, "Oh, we can't do that. That'll happen to us." His being in bonds actually made it worse for those people who didn't want to serve Yeshua. For those who wanted to serve, they were bold. They were very bold after Paul was arrested. And you would think it'd be just the opposite. But no, they turned it up a notch. And Paul was happy about that. 15 says, "Some indeed preach Yeshua, even of envy and strife, and some also of goodwill. The one preach Yeshua of contention, not sincerely, supposing to add affliction to my bonds, but the other of love, knowing that I am set for the defense of the gospel. What then? Notwithstanding every way, whether in pretense or in truth, Yeshua is preached, and I therein do rejoice, yea, and will rejoice." So Paul is saying that there was a few things that were wrong with Philippians, and one of them was the preachers, believe it or not. But it wasn't that many. It was only a couple in the Philippian church that was, teaching out of their flesh. The majority of them were teaching out of the Spirit. And that's what Paul was saying, that I rejoice when I hear that they're preaching out of the Spirit. And any elder who has brought in anyone and that person goes from being worldly to being a preacher, that elder is going to rejoice if he's in Yeshua. Because a lot of them don't, because they are haterades. So Paul finishes the chapter in chapter 1 by encouraging people to live for Yeshua. And yes, I don't know who said about conducting themselves, but conducting themselves according to Yeshua. Verses 1 through 11, Paul talks about humility, being humble. Let each of you not look on his own interest, but look at the interests of others. So Paul was coming against those who were not preaching right, but the majority of Philippians 1, Paul was encouraging them. And then throughout the book, it is a book of encouragement. If we go to chapter 2, we're going to read verses 3, 4, and 10. We're going to read Philippians chapter 2, verses 3 and 4, chapter 10, and chapters 14 and 15. Wonderful book, the book of Philippians. Wonderful. All books of the Bible are wonderful. But this book, you can feel the love, the epistle of love to Philippians 2, 3, 4. Let nothing be done through strife or vainglory, but in lowliness of mind, let each esteem other better than themselves. So again, Paul is letting them know to be humble. He is warning them because they're doing so well that Paul had to make sure that they understand to stay humble. Don't get big-headed. Don't get puffy chest. Don't start thinking that you know more than what the gospel is. Don't start preaching and teaching things that have nothing to do with the gospel. The death, burial, and resurrection of Yeshua. So he's letting them know. In verse 4, look not every man his own things, but every man also on the things of others. So he goes on how Yeshua humbled himself to become a servant, and we should humble ourselves, becoming servants. For this reason, he is exalted. And that's why in verse 10, he says that at the name of Yeshua, every knee should bow, of things in heaven and things in earth and things under the earth. So Paul encourages them to do everything without complaining, to do everything without murmuring, that they would shine like the lights in the world. So if we go down to 14 and 15, it says, do all things without murmurings and disputings. And Paul didn't say do ministry things. He says do all things. Verse 15, that ye may be blameless and harmless, the sons of God, without rebuke, in the midst of a crooked and perverse nation, among whom ye shine as lights in the world. So it says, be blameless, be harmless. In the midst of a crooked and perverse nation. And they were in the midst of a perverse nation. And he said, be blameless, harmless. The sons of God. That's the only way you can be the son of God. Being blameless and harmless. Saying things and doing things does not make you the son of God. It makes you the child of disobedience. So he finishes up the chapter with the hopes that he can send Timothy and Epaphroditus to Philippi soon. Chapter 3 talks about three aspects. And it talks about being aware. And it talks about being aware of people who put confidence in the flesh. So if you really want to sum up the book of Philippians, it's a book of humility. Philippians 3, 1 through 3. First thing with chapter 3, beware of those who put confidence in the flesh. That's number 1. And it says in Philippians 3 and 1, finally, my brethren, rejoice in the Lord. To write the same things to you, to me indeed is not grievous, but for you it is safe. Beware of dogs, beware of evildoers, beware of the concision. For we are the circumcision which worship God in the spirit and rejoice in Yeshua and have no confidence in the flesh. None. Rejoice and operate in the things of Yeshua. See, when it comes to, let's take, for example, C19. A lot of people have this about C19 and that about C19. So when you start to say what the world says about C19, you're putting your confidence in the flesh of C19. But what does Yeshua say about C19? That's what we should be more concerned about. About viruses living on surfaces for hours on end, for days on end. That's foolishness. That's crazy talk because viruses can't live. So that's crazy talk that a virus can live outside of a host for days. John G. Lake had the bubonic, the bubonic plague virus in his hand, and it died. It didn't inject, it didn't go inside of him. He didn't have it for 4 and 5 days in his hand. And the Africans that he was assisting was astonished. So see, what does that tell me? That tells me if you're living in faith, that a virus, no matter how contagious they say it is, because the bubonic plague was pretty contagious. In fact, the bubonic plague was very contagious. There was no mask. Mask wasn't doing nothing. They tried to do that and it didn't work. So Yeshua says, beware of those people who put confidence in the flesh. Beware of those people who, well, we just said. The next one that Paul talked about was throwing out the self-righteous. And we're going to read Philippians Chapter 3, verses 8 through 11. Throwing out the self-righteous. And it says, yea, doubtless, and I count all things but loss for the excellency of the knowledge of Yeshua my Lord, for whom I have suffered the loss of all things, but do count them but dung, that I may win Yeshua. Stop holding on to all these material things and all this other garbage that really can't get you nothing. but a headache and a pain. Paul said that everything that I have is done that I may win Yeshua. Stop holding on to material things. Verse 9 says, and be found in him, not having mine own righteousness, which is of the law, but that which is through the faith of Yeshua. The righteousness which is of God by faith. Paul, not my own righteousness, because your righteousness will get you to the lake which burn of fire and brimstone. Your righteousness is not going to get you anywhere but eternal damnation. But Yeshua's righteousness will get you the new Jerusalem. In verse 9, he says, and be found verse 10 says, that I may know him and the power of his resurrection and the fellowship of his sufferings, being made conformable unto his death. Paul had to change. And if you all do not change, it's not going to be good. 11 says, if by any means I might attain unto the resurrection of the dead. Paul knew he was going to die. And he knew that he would be resurrected with the dead. He knew Yeshua's time was not right then and there, because he probably read the book of Daniel. And Paul, very smart and very astute, probably understood what the book of Daniel was talking about. So he knew that he dies, he rests, goes to Abraham's bosom, and he's resurrected again at Yeshua's coming. The third one is straining toward the goal of heaven. And we're going to read Philippians Chapter 3, verses 12 through 21. And say Philippians is a beautiful book. But there was a church that was doing it even better than Philippi. And we're going to talk about them soon. Philippians 3 and 12, not as though I had already attained, either were already perfect, but I follow after, if that I may apprehend that for which also I am apprehended of Yeshua. What? What is he saying? I've already attained, already perfect, but I follow and apprehend. Also, I am apprehended of Yeshua. Sound like double talk, Paul, but it's not. What he's saying is that he's apprehended, he's arrested of Yeshua. He's arrested. And because he's arrested in Yeshua, he's already perfect. But he's going to continue to follow after being apprehended in Yeshua. So he's basically using his house arrest as motivation for us. 13 says, brethren, I count not myself to have apprehended, but this one thing do I, forgetting those things which are behind and reaching forth unto those things which are before. I press toward the mark for the prize of the hall calling of God in Yeshua. Let us therefore, as many as be perfect, be thus minded, and if in anything ye be likewise minded, God shall reveal even this unto you. You start to be like-minded with Yeshua, which is a goal that we all need to attain. Nevertheless, whereunto we have already attained, let us walk by the same rule. Let us mind the same thing. Brethren, be followers together of me, and mark them which walk so as ye have us for an example. For many walk, of whom I have told you often, and now tell you even weeping, that they are the enemies of the cross of Yeshua. Say it all the time. You put on your all white, you put on your fringes, you grab all the Hebrew names you can possibly have. On the Sabbath day, you're on Sunday, you hellfire. Paul is saying, be mindful, be careful of those, because they are the enemies of Yeshua. In 19, he says, whose end is destruction, whose God is their belly, and whose glory is in their shame, who mind earthly things. That's saying a lot in verse 19. Their destruction is already there. The God is in their belly. That means they live for the lust of the flesh, whose glory is their shame, who mind earthly things. You think on things of the earth, on the world. And I know I've said this before. It's asinine not to give a baby water, right? But then you have these witch doctors who say, don't give the baby water. They may have water acid reflux or some idiotic thing like that. Back in the Bible day, what did they do? They gave children water. They gave children milk. There was no formula. Women had breastises, so they breastfed. But that was a silly thing that, back in the early part of this ministry, when women started having children, the doctors were telling them, don't give your baby water. And I forgot what that supposedly did. Don't give them a lot of water. No, 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 no. Well, you go 3 and 4 months without water and see how you're going to act. See how you're going to feel. Okay, that's just one of the idiotic things that the world brings up. There's a lot of idiotic things that the world pulls together. But we don't have time for all the idiotic things that the world pulled together. Like, I heard that there's a cure for COVID. And you want to know what it is? Horse urine. Horse urine. Yes. Horse urine is a cure for COVID. It's a cure for COVID. And when I heard that, it was, I just could not believe it. But horse urine, those are people who have their mind on earthly things. Verse 20 for our conversation is in heaven. So if your conversation is in heaven, you're not talking about drinking horse urine or neglecting babies from water. They already got it in production. From whence also we look for the Savior, the Lord Yeshua. They also say human urine is also a deterrent for COVID. I think I'll stick to with my vitamin C. I'm not about to drink human urine. It's waste. It's bile. Your liver is getting rid of it. Why are you ingesting it back in? It's ridiculous. Verse 21, who shall change our vile body, that it may be fashioned like unto his glorious body, according to the working whereby he is able even to subdue all things unto himself. This chapter, Paul is encouraging people to throw out their confidence in the world and bring on the confidence in Yeshua through righteousness. He says that Yeshua suffers all things. We read that in Philippians 3. Did we read it in 3? I don't think we read 3 and 10. Yeah, we did read 3 and 10. So 3 and 10 says that I may know him and the power of his resurrection and the fellowship of his offerings, being made comfortable unto his death. Paul explains how the enemies of Yeshua have set their minds on earthly things, and that's their destruction. So we need to strain towards heaven by thinking heavenly things. That's what we need to do. In chapter 4, he starts off urging the people to help two young ladies in the church agree in the Lord. Philippians Chapter 4, verses 1 and 2. And it says, therefore, my brethren, dearly beloved, and longing for my joy and crown, so stand fast in the Lord, my dearly beloved. I beseech Eodius and beseech Syntyche that they be of the same mind in the Lord. Now, there's no explanation on what they were fighting over. That wasn't Paul's mindset to say what them dead girls talking and fighting about. Now he says that they had to make amends, and the leaders of the church had to assist them in making amends, and they had to do it through prayer and supplication. It had to be peace in the church, because as we read in Corinth, if you allow that leaven to continue, it's going to spread. So Paul starts to tell them that, yes, help these two sisters out. They have some type of difference going on. Help them out through prayer and supplication. In verse 6, he says, be careful for nothing, but in everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving. Let your requests be made known unto God, and the peace of God, which passeth all understanding, shall keep your hearts and minds through Yeshua. So he's saying that with the strife that's going on with these two young ladies, what you do, prayer, supplication, knowledge and wisdom of Yeshua, and when he gives you that, do it. And your heart and minds will be at peace because you know that you did what Yeshua said. Do what he says. It would behoove you to do that. Paul encourages the people to think about things that are good. In Philippians 4 and 8, finally, brethren, whatsoever things are true, whatsoever things are honest, whatsoever things are just, whatsoever things are pure, whatsoever things are lovely, whatsoever things are of good report, if there be any virtue and if there be any praise, think on these things. So he starts to thank the people in the end of the letter, starts thanking people for sharing his troubles. because they were the only church that partnered with him. Only one. They did well. Paul did not accept things from other churches, but he did with Philippi. The only one out of all the ones that we're going to talk about. We only have two more. Out of all the ones that we're talking about, the book is about joy, true joy, contentment, building a relationship through Yeshua, divine purpose. And that's what Paul wanted to communicate with the Philippians. Yeshua is the ultimate encouragement, the ultimate example. The book is about being humble, sacrifice, and joy. The joy in suffering as Yeshua suffered. In Philippians 2:8, and being found in fashion as a man, he humbled himself and became obedient unto death, even the death of the cross. So the joy of suffering as Yeshua suffered. We, Israelites, can experience joy in the service that we do. Rereading again Philippians 2:17 and 18. Yea, and if I be offered upon the sacrifice and service of your faith, I joy and rejoice with all of you. For the same cause also do ye joy and rejoice with me. You can have experience of joy in just believing. Philippians 3:9 again says, and be found in him, not having mine own righteousness, which is of the law, but that which is through the faith of Yeshua, and the righteousness which is of God by faith. Joy in giving, Paul talks about that. Philippians 4:18 and 19. Philippians 4:18 and 19. And it says, but I have all and abound. I am full, having received of Epaphroditus the things which were sent from you, an odor of a sweet smell, a sacrifice acceptable, well-pleasing to God. But my God shall supply all your needs according to his riches in the glory by Yeshua. So that's how we get the understanding that Paul gave to this church gave back to Paul. The only one. You would think that would make this Paul's favorite, but it's not. We'll get to that one we'll get to that one soon. So an outline of the outline of the epistle of the Philippians, chapter 1, joy and suffering. Chapter 2, joy in serving. Chapter 3, joy in faith. And then chapter 4, joy in giving. Joy, joy, joy. That's the book of Philippians. Next week, Colossians. Colossians, 4 chapters. That's it. Tomorrow, our Bible study starts at 7 p.m. Well, not really a Bible study. I don't like to call it a Bible study. It's, getting to the New Jerusalem. Behavior and mannerisms. We're going to talk about the most deadliest part of your body, the tongue. I know some people may say the feet. Some people may say the breath. Some people may say my armpits, but it's the tongue. Okay? The Sabbath lesson is going to be War Part 4. We're going to talk about curses, rising up, Leviticus 26. Women, we're going to make a declaration of war, and we're going to make a declaration of our independence as Israelites. Any questions on here on the chat? All right, so we want to give thanks to Yeshua, the Holy Spirit, and those of you who participated in the lesson. Thank you for participating on the chat. Thank you for participating here. I would like to hear more from you on the chat, not just two individuals. Colossians is next week. If you've enjoyed the lesson and found it educational, like, share, and subscribe. Hit the notification. That'll let you know when we go live. And do the like button. I don't know what it does, but the like button. Oh, it puts us in algorithms or something, right? So like the lesson. If you don't like it, fine too. We'll find out who you are if you press the dislike button. All right. All praises be to Ahia, Kwam Yasharal.